Tanaka-sama, kono shitsurei o yurushi kudasai. Watashi ga otetsudai dekimasu. Zola Hayes whispered in flawless Japanese. Tanaka-sama, please forgive this disrespect. I can help. Her voice quivering with resolve, yet anchored by purpose. In a radiant Seattle restaurant, where a $1 billion deal hung in the balance, her words sliced through the arrogance of a room that dismissed a silent Japanese billionaire, Aiko Tanaka. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a clash of veiled motives and unspoken strength. Zola, a waitress unseen by all, held a secret that would unravel a web of deceit, flipping a predatory scheme upside down. This tale of courage will grip you until its final twist, where the overlooked redefine their futures. Follow our channel for stories that shift perspectives and share where you're tuning in from, city, time, or vibe. Stay with us. The truth reshapes everything. The rain-slicked glass of Seattle's Horizon Spire reflected the restless shimmer of Puget Sound below, where waves churned under a bruised September sky. High atop the tower, in the exclusive embrace of the Aurora Room, a private dining chamber glowed like a jewel against the city's twilight. Crystal chandeliers hung like suspended starlight, casting prisms across polished mahogany walls. The air was heavy with the scent of seared scallops, aged bourbon, and ambition so thick it could choke a lesser soul. This was no ordinary dinner. This was a battlefield, dressed in silk and silver, where a $1 billion deal teetered on the edge of betrayal. At the head of a long, curved walnut table sat Aiko Tanaka, the Japanese billionaire whose name was synonymous with Neurotech Nippon, a company that had redefined medical AI with neural interfaces so precise they could guide a surgeon's hand through a heartbeat. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, her indigo silk dress flowing like liquid midnight. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, just an aura of quiet command that seemed to unsettle the room. Aiko's dark eyes, sharp as obsidian, scanned the faces around her, but her lips remained sealed. She spoke only in Japanese. Her aide, a wiry man in a charcoal suit, perched behind her, ready to translate. Her silence wasn't fragility, it was a fortress, built from years of navigating rooms that tried to shrink her. Tonight, though, that fortress felt like it was under siege. Across the table, James Whitaker, CEO of Synergy Med, leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man who believed he owned the room. His tailored navy suit hugged his broad frame, and his smile, polished, predatory, flashed like a blade. At 50, James had built an empire on charm and ruthlessness, and tonight, he was poised to swallow Neurotech Nippon whole. His blonde hair, streaked with silver, gleamed under the chandelier's glow, and his fingers drummed lightly on the table, betraying a flicker of impatience beneath his polished exterior. Beside him, his CFO, a younger man named Ethan Cole, fidgeted with a gold cufflink, his sharp eyes darting between James and Aiko. Ethan's suit was sharper, his ambition hungrier, but both men shared the same certainty. Aiko Tanaka was a puzzle they could solve, a prize they could claim. Zola Hayes moved like a shadow through the room, her lean frame cloaked in the black and white uniform of the Aurora Room's staff. At 26, she carried herself with the grace of a dancer, her almond eyes catching every detail. The way James's smile tightened when Aiko didn't respond. The way Ethan's pen tapped faster when her aide translated her sparse words. Zola's hands, steady as she poured Pinot Noir into crystal glasses, hid a storm of emotions. She'd learned to be invisible in places like this, where wealth and power drowned out voices like hers. But tonight, her heart raced with something sharper than duty. She knew this world, the world of being underestimated, of being unseen. Born in Oakland, raised partly in Osaka, Zola had grown up straddling cultures, her fluency in Japanese a quiet gift from a childhood spent chasing fireflies along temple paths. Now working to fund her design degree, she felt the weight of every glance that dismissed her as just a waitress. James raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the light. "To partnerships that reshape the future," he said, his voice smooth as velvet but edged with condescension. His eyes locked on Aiko, waiting for a reaction, a crack in her composure. Aiko lifted her glass in response, her movements deliberate, her face unreadable. She sipped, said nothing. Her aide leaned forward, his voice flat. Ms. Tanaka appreciates the toast. James's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Ethan leaned closer, muttering under his breath. Is she even listening? Or are we just talking to a wall? His words were meant to be private, but they carried in the quiet room, sharp enough to sting. Zola, clearing a plate nearby, felt her chest tighten. She saw the way Aiko's fingers paused on her glass, the barest shift in her posture, a woman absorbing a blow without flinching. Zola knew that feeling too well, the sting of being reduced to a stereotype, of having your intelligence questioned because of how you looked or what you didn't say. Her pulse quickened as she caught Ethan's smirk, the way James's eyes lingered on Aiko, with a mix of pity and calculation. They thought her silence was weakness, her language a barrier they could exploit. Zola's hands trembled as she set the plate down, her mind racing with memories of Osaka, of learning to bow with intention, of words that carried respect in their cadence. She wanted to speak, to shatter their arrogance, but the weight of her role held her back. For now. The table gleamed with untouched appetizers, oysters on beds of ice, garnished with caviar. But the real feast was the tension simmering beneath the surface. James launched into a monologue about Synergy Med's global reach, his words laced with jargon. Market penetration, scalable infrastructure, synergistic alignment. He gestured grandly, as if addressing an invisible boardroom, but his eyes kept flicking to Aiko, searching for a reaction. She gave none. Her aide translated her response in a single sentence. Ms. Tanaka is considering the proposal. Ethan scoffed softly, rolling his eyes. Considering, he muttered to James. What's there to consider? She's out of her depth. The words landed like a slap, and Zola's jaw clenched. She saw Aiko's eyes narrow, just for a moment, a glint of steel beneath her calm. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows like a warning. Zola moved to refill James's glass, her movements precise, her face a mask of professionalism. But her eyes were alive, drinking in every detail, the way Aiko's fingers traced the edge of her napkin, a silent calculation, the way James's charm was starting to crack, his patience thinning. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a chessboard, and the pieces were moving faster than anyone realized. Zola felt the weight of her own silence, a mirror to Aiko's, and something stirred deep within her, a spark of defiance, a whisper of courage. She didn't know it yet, but this night would change everything. The Aurora room pulsed with an undercurrent of disdain, its opulent glow dimmed by the sharp edges of human arrogance. The rain outside battered the floor-to-ceiling windows, a relentless drumbeat that seemed to echo the rising tension within. The walnut table, laden with untouched delicacies, seared tuna drizzled with yuzu, microgreens glistening under candlelight, stood as a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Aiko Tanaka sat at the head, her indigo silk dress catching the chandelier's shimmer like a still lake under moonlight. Her silence, a deliberate shield, only deepened the unease of the men across from her. To them, her restraint was a void to be filled with their own assumptions, a canvas for their prejudices. James Whitaker, CEO of Synergy Med, leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table with calculated ease. His voice, smooth as polished stone, carried the weight of a man accustomed to bending others to his will. Ms. Tanaka, our vision is global, he said, gesturing expansively. Synergy Med can take Neurotech Nippon's innovations to every corner of the world, hospitals, clinics, even war zones. His words were grand, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of condescension, as if he were explaining a complex game to a child. Aiko's face remained impassive, her dark eyes fixed on him like a hawk tracking prey. She murmured a brief phrase in Japanese to her aide, who translated in a monotone. Ms. Tanaka acknowledges your vision. James's smile tightened, a crack in his polished facade. He wasn't used to responses so sparse, so unyielding. Ethan Cole, the CFO, shifted in his seat, his gold cufflinks glinting as he toyed with his pen. Younger than James, his ambition was a live wire, sparking with impatience. Look, let's cut to the chase, he said, his voice low but sharp, barely masking his irritation. "We're offering a deal that's more than fair. You won't find better terms." He leaned toward James, muttering just loud enough for the table to hear. "Is she even getting this? Or are we wasting our breath on a silent doll?" The words landed like a slap, and Aiko's fingers, resting lightly on her napkin, tensed for a fleeting moment. Her aide translated nothing, his eyes fixed on the table, but the air grew heavier, as if the room itself had taken a breath. Zola Hayes, moving silently along the edges of the room, felt the sting of Ethan's words in her chest. She carried a silver tray of crystal water glasses, her steps measured, her face a mask of professionalism. But beneath it, a fire smoldered. She knew that tone, the casual cruelty of men who thought their whispers were invisible, who assumed their power erased the humanity of others. Zola's past flickered in her mind. The classrooms where her voice was ignored, the job interviews where her qualifications were questioned because her skin didn't match their expectations. And Osaka, those years of folding origami cranes with schoolmates who never questioned her belonging, felt like a distant dream in this room of cold ambition. Her hands tightened around the tray as she caught Aiko's subtle flinch, a mirror to her own buried wounds. James pressed on, undeterred, his voice rising with theatrical flair. "Imagine the headlines. Neurotech Nippon in Synergy Med revolutionize healthcare. Your AI, our distribution, it's unstoppable." He paused, waiting for Aiko to nod, to smile, to give him something. She didn't. Instead, she spoke softly in Japanese, her tone calm but edged with steel. Her aide translated, "Ms. Tanaka requests specifics on the intellectual property terms." Ethan snorted, rolling his eyes. "Specifics? She's stalling. Probably doesn't even understand what IP means." The comment was meant for James, but it carried, slicing through the room's fragile civility. Zola, refilling a glass nearby, felt her pulse quicken. She saw Aiko's jaw tighten, a quiet storm brewing behind her composed exterior. It wasn't just an insult, it was erasure. Zola's heart pounded as she moved to clear a plate, her movements deliberate to mask the fury building inside her. She knew Aiko understood more than they thought. Her eyes betrayed a mind that missed nothing. But to James and Ethan, Aiko's silence was a weakness, her language a wall they could climb over. They didn't see the woman who had built Neurotech Nippon from a single patent to a global force. They saw a stereotype, a foreign woman, demure and out of place. Zola's own invisibility stung in parallel. She was just the help to them, her fluency in Japanese irrelevant, her dreams of design buried under the weight of their indifference. Yet as she caught Aiko's gaze for a fleeting second, she felt a spark of recognition, a shared understanding of being underestimated, of carrying strength no one bothered to see. The rain outside grew fiercer, its rhythm a counterpoint to the room's escalating tension. James leaned back, his charm fraying at the edges. "We've laid out the numbers," he said, his voice now tinged with impatience. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Ms. Tanaka." Aiko responded with a single sentence in Japanese, her aide translating, "Ms. Tanaka will review the contract carefully." Ethan muttered, "Carefully? What's she gonna do? Run it through a translator app?" His laugh was sharp, cutting. Zola's hands shook as she set down a carafe, the urge to speak clawing at her throat. She saw Aiko's fingers fold her napkin with precision, a gesture of control in a room that sought to unravel her. The Aurora room was no longer just a dining space. It was a crucible, forging something raw and unspoken. Zola felt the weight of her own silence, a mirror to Aiko's, and the spark within her grew brighter. She didn't know how or when, but she sensed this night was building toward a reckoning. For now she remained in the shadows, watching, waiting, her heart a drumbeat of defiance. The Aurora room was a crucible of ambition, its golden glow now tinged with menace as the Seattle rain lashed the windows like a warning from the gods. The walnut table gleamed under the chandelier's light, its surface cluttered with half-eaten plates of truffle-dusted risotto and untouched flutes of champagne. At the heart of this opulent stage, a silent war was brewing, its weapons cloaked in smiles and carefully chosen words. Aiko Tanaka sat like a statue carved from onyx, her indigo silk dress a quiet defiance against the room's clamor. Her dark eyes, sharp and unyielding, missed nothing. Every smirk, every whispered jab, every flicker of deceit. Her silence, once a shield, now felt like a blade, poised to strike. But for now she waited, her hands folded with the precision of a calligrapher, her composure a fortress against the storm. James Whitaker, CEO of Synergy Med, leaned forward, his navy suit creasing slightly as he slid a sleek leather folder across the table. "Here it is, Ms. Tanaka," he said, his voice dripping with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. The contract, clean, fair, transformative. His smile was a polished weapon, but his eyes betrayed a predatory glint, as if he could already taste the victory of swallowing Neurotech Nippon whole. Beside him, Ethan Cole, the CFO, tapped his pen against the table, a restless rhythm that betrayed his hunger for the deal to close. "It's all there," Ethan added, his tone clipped, impatient. "Sign this, and we're partners in history." His words were meant to sound grand, but they carried a sneer, as if Aiko's hesitation was an insult to their generosity. Zola Hayes moved through the room like a phantom, her black and white uniform blending into the shadows as she cleared a glass here, adjusted a napkin there. Her heart pounded, a drumbeat of fury and recognition. She'd heard the undercurrents of this conversation before, not in words but in the dismissive glances of professors, the cold smiles of hiring managers who saw her skin before her skills. Now as she lingered near the service station, pretending to polish a carafe, she caught fragments of James and Ethan's private exchange. "She won't spot the fine print," Ethan muttered, his voice low but careless. "IP transfers buried in Section 8. By the time she figures it out, we'll own her tech." James chuckled, a sound like gravel underfoot. "And that non-compete? She'll be out of the game for good." Zola's breath caught, her fingers tightening around the carafe until her knuckles paled. They weren't just negotiating. They were plotting to erase Aiko. Aiko's aide, a stoic figure in a charcoal suit, leaned toward her, whispering a translation of James's latest pitch. Aiko's response was a single sentence in Japanese, her voice soft, but laced with an edge that made her aide pause. He translated, "Ms. Tanaka requests clarification on the intellectual property clauses." James's smile didn't waver, but his fingers twitched, betraying a flicker of unease. "It's standard," he said smoothly, flipping open the contract to a page dense with legalese. "Just ensures mutual protection for our innovations." His words were honey, but Zola, hovering near the table with a tray of desserts, saw the lie in his posture, the way he leaned too close, as if to overwhelm Aiko with his presence. She saw Aiko's eyes narrow, a subtle shift that spoke of suspicion, not surrender. Zola's mind raced as she set down a plate of matcha-dusted mochi, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. She remembered Osaka, the quiet respect of her teachers, the way language carried weight beyond words. Aiko wasn't just a billionaire. She was a woman fighting to be seen in a room that refused to look. Zola knew that fight. She'd felt it in the way her designs were dismissed as too bold, or her ideas overlooked because she didn't fit the mold of genius. Now as she caught Ethan's smirk, she felt a fire ignite in her chest. The contract wasn't a partnership. It was a trap, designed to strip Aiko of her life's work. The intellectual property clause Zola overheard would let Synergy Med sell Aiko's neural AI patents without her consent. The non-compete would silence her for 15 years, a death sentence for her legacy. The rain outside roared, a crescendo that matched the tension coiling in the room. Aiko spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper, her Japanese words carrying a weight that made her aide hesitate. "Koko ni honto ni watashi o rikai suru hito wa iru no ka," she murmured, her eyes drifting to the window, as if seeking an answer in the storm. Her aide didn't translate, but Zola, standing just feet away, heard every syllable. "Is there truly anyone here who understands me?" The word struck Zola like a bell, resonating with her own buried pain, of being unseen, unheard, underestimated. Her pulse thundered, her hands trembling as she adjusted a glass. She wanted to speak, to bridge the chasm between Aiko's solitude and her own, but the weight of her role, her invisibility, held her back. James, oblivious to Aiko's quiet plea, pressed on. "This is your moment, Miss Tanaka," he said, his voice now tinged with impatience. "Sign and we'll make history together." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Or don't, and miss the biggest opportunity of your career." Their words were a challenge, a dare to a woman they thought they could outmaneuver. Aiko's fingers traced the edge of the contract folder, her silence a gathering storm. Zola, watching from the shadows, felt the spark within her flare brighter. The room was no longer just a dining hall, it was a precipice, and something was about to break. The Aurora room held its breath, the air thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Rain lashed the windows, a furious percussion that mirrored the pulse pounding in Zola Hayes' chest. The chandelier's light cast jagged prisms across the walnut table, where plates of uneaten delicacies sat like relics of a failed truce. Aiko Tanaka, the Japanese billionaire at the table's head, was a vision of serene defiance, her indigo silk dress catching the glow like a beacon in the storm. Her silence, once a fortress, now felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap. Across from her, James Whitaker and Ethan Cole, the architects of Synergy Med's predatory deal, wore their arrogance like armor, oblivious to the fracture forming beneath their feet. But Zola, the unseen waitress in the shadows, was no longer content to watch. Her heart roared with a fire she could no longer contain. James leaned back, his navy suit creasing as he tapped the leather contract folder. "Ms. Tanaka, this is your chance to join a legacy," he said, his voice smooth but edged with impatience. "Sign now, and we'll handle the details." Ethan smirked, his gold cufflinks glinting, as he added, "It's straightforward. No need to overthink it." Their words dripped with condescension, as if Aiko's hesitation was a flaw rather than a strategy. Aiko's dark eyes flickered, her fingers tracing the folder's edge with deliberate calm. She murmured in Japanese to her aide, who translated, "Ms. Tanaka requests a detailed review of the terms." Ethan's laugh was sharp, cutting through the room. "Review? What's she gonna do, hire a translator to babysit her?" The insult landed like a blade, and Zola, standing by the service station with a carafe in hand, felt her blood boil. Her hands trembled, the glass carafe nearly slipping as Ethan's words echoed in her mind. She saw Aiko's jaw tighten, a fleeting crack in her composure, and Zola's own memories surged. Years of being dismissed, her designs ignored, her voice silenced because she didn't fit the mold. Osaka had taught her the weight of words, the respect embedded in every syllable. But here, in this gilded cage, respect was a currency these men refused to spend. Zola's eyes locked on Aiko's, catching the quiet storm behind her gaze. She knew that look, the ache of being unseen, the exhaustion of fighting a world that refused to listen. And then, Aiko spoke, her voice a whisper meant for no one but the air. "Koko ni honto ni watashi o rikai suru hito wa iru no ka?" Is there truly anyone here who understands me? The words pierced Zola's heart, a call she could no longer ignore. She set the carafe down, the clink against the table echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. Her manager's warning, "Stay invisible, do your job," rang in her ears, but it was drowned by the roar of her own defiance. Zola stepped forward, her black and white uniform no longer a cloak of anonymity, but a badge of her resolve. The click of her heels against the hardwood floor was a declaration, each step a rebellion against the rules that bound her. James glanced up, his brow furrowing. Ethan's smirk faded, replaced by confusion. Aiko's aide froze, his pen hovering over his notepad. Zola stopped beside Aiko, her heart thundering, and bowed low. A deep, reverent bow, not the shallow nod of service, but the kind reserved for elders, for those whose presence carried weight beyond words. Rising, she met Aiko's eyes and spoke, her voice steady despite the storm within. "Tanaka-sama, kono shichure o yurushi kudasai. Watashi ga otetsudai dekimasu." "Tanaka-sama, please forgive this disrespect. I can help." The Japanese words flowed like a river, flawless and fierce, cutting through the room's arrogance. James's glass slipped, clinking against the table. Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came. Aiko's eyes widened, not in shock but in recognition. like a lighthouse piercing the fog. For the first time that night, a faint smile curved her lips, a silent acknowledgement of Zola's courage. Arigato, Aiko whispered, her hand brushing Zola's arm, a gesture of trust that shifted the room's gravity. Zola turned to the table, her posture unyielding. Ms. Tanaka has asked me to translate moving forward, she said, her voice clear, commanding. She believes it's time you understand her fully. Ethan sputtered. You're the waitress. James's smile was gone, his eyes narrowing as if recalculating his strategy. Zola opened the contract folder, her fingers steady despite the weight of every gaze. She wasn't a lawyer, but she'd spent nights poring over her mother's diplomatic briefs, learning to spot the sharp edges hidden in fine print. Her eyes scanned Section 8, pausing on the intellectual property clause. This, she said, her tone sharp, allows Synergy Med to sell Miss Tanaka's AI patents without her approval post-merger. James's face paled, but Zola pressed on, flipping to the non-compete clause. And this? It bars her from the industry for 15 years. This isn't a partnership. It's a takeover. The room was a powder keg, and Zola had struck the match. Aiko's silence, once a mystery, was now a weapon, and Zola was its voice. The rain outside roared, but inside the real storm had just begun. The Aurora room was a tinderbox, its golden light now crackling with the heat of a reckoning. The Seattle rain roared against the windows, a relentless fury that mirrored the storm unfolding within. The walnut table, strewn with half-touched plates of yuzu-glazed salmon and crystal glasses stained with wine, bore witness to a battle no one had anticipated. Zola Hayes stood at the epicenter, her black and white uniform no longer a cloak of invisibility, but a banner of defiance. Her words, sharp, precise, had sliced through the room's arrogance, exposing the predatory clauses in Synergy Med's contract. Aiko Tanaka, the Japanese billionaire, sat at the table's head, her indigo silk dress shimmering like a calm sea before a tempest. Her silence, once mistaken for weakness, was now a thunderhead, gathering force. The air was electric, and the balance of power was about to shift. James Whitaker, CEO of Synergy Med, gripped the edge of the contract folder, his knuckles whitening. His polished smile had vanished, replaced by a taut mask of disbelief. That's a misinterpretation, he said, his voice strained, as if trying to reclaim control. Those clauses are standard, protection for both sides. But his eyes betrayed him, darting to Ethan Cole, whose restless tapping had stopped, his gold cufflinks glinting as he leaned back, face pale. Ethan's earlier smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of panic. You're out of line, he snapped at Zola, his voice sharp but unsteady. You're not part of this. Zola stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. Ms. Tanaka deserves to know the truth, she said, her voice a blade cutting through their bluster. Aiko's eyes met hers, a spark of gratitude flashing in their depths, a silent alliance forged in that fleeting glance. Zola's heart pounded, a drumbeat of courage and fear. She'd crossed a line, defied her role, her manager's orders, the very structure of this gilded world. But Aiko's whispered question from moments before, is there truly anyone here who understands me? Still echoed in her mind, a call she'd answered with her whole being. She flipped another page in the contract, her fingers steady despite the weight of every stare. Section 12, she said, her tone deliberate, bans Ms. Tanaka from consulting, innovating, or even speaking at conferences for 15 years. This isn't a partnership, it's a gag order. The room fell silent, the only sound the rain's relentless assault. James's jaw clenched, his composure cracking like thin ice. Ethan muttered under his breath, she's just a waitress. But the words lacked conviction, crumbling in the face of Zola's clarity. Aiko's aide, a quiet figure in a charcoal suit, shifted slightly, his eyes flicking to his employer. Aiko spoke, her voice soft but resonant, a single sentence in Japanese that carried the weight of a verdict. She gestured to her aide, who reached into his blazer and produced a sleek silver device, no larger than a credit card. With a subtle nod from Aiko, he pressed a button, and the room was filled with the crackle of static, followed by James's voice, unmistakable and damning. Bury the IP transfer deep. She won't catch it. By the time she does, we'll own her tech. Ethan's laugh followed, sharp and cruel. She's clueless. Language barrier's our best friend. The recording clicked off with a metallic snap, leaving a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. Zola translated, her voice steady but laced with controlled fury. They planned to deceive Ms. Tanaka, assuming her silence meant ignorance. They mocked her, plotted to strip her legacy, and laughed about it. James's face drained of color, his hands trembling as he pushed the contract away. That's not admissible, he stammered, but his voice was hollow, a man grasping at straws. Ethan stood, his chair scraping against the floor. You can't record private meetings, that's illegal. Zola's eyes locked on his, unflinching. So is fraud, she said, her words a quiet thunderclap. Aiko leaned back, her posture regal, her silence now a weapon. Her eyes, sharp as obsidian, held James and Ethan in a gaze that stripped them bare. She wasn't just a billionaire. She was a force, and they had underestimated her at their peril. The room was a battlefield, the air charged with the aftermath of truth. Aiko spoke again, her Japanese words measured, deliberate. Zola translated, Ms. Tanaka is terminating negotiations with Synergy Med, effective immediately. She reserves the right to pursue legal action for attempted fraud. James's shoulders slumped, his empire crumbling in the span of a breath. Ethan's face twisted, a mix of rage and fear, but he had no words left to wield. Zola stood tall, her heart racing with a strange mix of triumph and vulnerability. She'd shattered the illusion of power in this room, but she knew the cost might follow. Her manager's glare burned from the corner, a silent promise of consequences. Yet as Aiko's hand brushed hers, a gesture of quiet solidarity, Zola felt something new, a spark of possibility, a door creaking open. The rain outside softened, as if the storm had spent its fury. But inside the Aurora room, the real tempest had just broken, and the pieces were falling into place. Zola had lit the fuse, and Aiko had fanned the flames. Together they had turned the tables, and nothing would be the same. The Aurora room was a battlefield strewn with the wreckage of shattered egos. The Seattle rain had softened to a murmur, its rhythm a faint echo of the storm that had just erupted within. The walnut table, littered with abandoned plates and overturned glasses, reflected the chandelier's fractured light, as if the room itself were reeling from the upheaval. Aiko Tanaka sat at the head, her indigo silk dress a beacon of calm amid the chaos, her silence now a throne from which she wielded undeniable power. Zola Hayes stood beside her, her black and white uniform a stark contrast to the fire in her eyes. The air was thick with the aftershock of truth. James Whitaker and Ethan Cole's deceit lay exposed, their predatory contract dismantled by Zola's courage and Aiko's resolve. But the battle wasn't over. The consequences were just beginning to unfold. James slumped in his chair, his navy suit rumpled, his face a mask of ashen defeat. The recording, his own voice plotting to strip Aiko's legacy, still echoed in his ears, a death knell to his ambitions. Ethan, his earlier bravado gone, gripped the table's edge, his knuckles pale, his eyes darting like a cornered animal's. This is a setup, he muttered, his voice hoarse, but the words lacked conviction, dissolving into the room's heavy silence. Zola's heart pounded, a mix of triumph and dread. She'd ignited this reckoning, but the weight of her defiance pressed against her chest. She felt her manager's glare from the corner, a storm brewing in his narrowed eyes. She'd broken every rule of the Aurora room, and she knew the cost was coming. The door swung open with a sharp creak, and Richard Holt, the restaurant's manager, stormed in, his face flushed with fury. His usually crisp demeanor was unraveling, his tie askew as he strode past James and Ethan, ignoring Aiko entirely. "Zola!" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that cut through the room. "You've crossed every line. You're done here. Fired. Get out." The words landed like a blow, and Zola's breath caught, her hands clenching at her sides. She'd known this was possible, but the reality stung. A cold reminder of the world that punished those who dared to speak. Ethan snorted, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. "About time," he muttered. "She's been trouble from the start." Zola's jaw tightened, but she held her ground, her eyes fixed on the table, refusing to let their disdain break her. Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension, deep and commanding, like a tide turning. "No one's firing Ms. Hayes tonight." All eyes turned to the doorway, where Elena Carter stood, her presence as formidable as a gathering storm. A renowned investor and key partner in Neurotech Nippon's U.S. expansion. Elena was a woman in her late 40s, her tailored gray blazer and silver hoop earrings exuding quiet authority. Her dark eyes swept the room, taking in James's defeat, Ethan's panic, and Richard's rage. "I've been watching from the main dining room," she said, stepping forward, her voice steady but laced with steel. "I heard the recording. I saw how you treated Ms. Tanaka, and how Ms. Hayes stood up for what's right. You don't fire integrity." Richard opened his mouth, but Elena's gaze silenced him. "You owe her an apology," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Richard's face reddened, but he stepped back, his authority crumbling. Zola's throat tightened, a wave of relief mingling with disbelief. For the first time that night, she felt seen, not as a waitress, but as a person whose voice mattered. Aiko turned to her, her dark eyes softening with a warmth that pierced Zola's defenses. In soft, accented English, Aiko spoke directly to her. "You saw me when no one else did." Then switching to Japanese, she added a quiet sentence, her aide translating. "Ms. Tanaka offers you a role at Neurotech Nippon as a cultural and strategic advisor." Zola blinked, her breath catching. The offer was a lifeline, a chance to step out of the shadows. Aiko continued, her voice steady through her aide. "You'll work with us in Seattle, advising on partnerships and bridging cultures. We'll support your design career with connections to industry leaders." Zola's heart swelled, the weight of years spent fighting for scraps of opportunity lifting slightly. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'd be honored." Aiko's hand brushed hers, a gesture of solidarity that anchored Zola in the moment. James and Ethan sat in stunned silence, their empire unraveling. Within days, whispers of their deceit would leak, staining Synergy Med's reputation. James would face a boardroom reckoning, his resignation inevitable. Ethan's career would falter, his arrogance a footnote in a story of failure. But for Zola, the night was a turning point. The Aurora Room, once a cage, was now a crucible where her courage had forged a new path. She stood taller, her apron still tied but her spirit unbound. Aiko's offer wasn't just a job, it was a promise of a future where her voice would never again be silenced. The rain outside had stilled, the city lights glinting through the windows like stars breaking through clouds. The Aurora Room was quiet now, but its silence was no longer oppressive. It was the calm after a storm, the prelude to a new beginning. The Seattle skyline shimmered through the morning mist, its glass towers piercing a sky washed clean by the previous night's rain. The Aurora Room was a distant memory, its gilded walls and fraught silences replaced by the quiet hum of possibility. Zola Hayes stood on the balcony of her new apartment, a modest but sunlit space overlooking Puget Sound, courtesy of Neurotech Nippon's relocation support. The breeze carried the tang of salt and freedom, stirring her dark curls as she clutched a sketchbook, its pages brimming with designs for interfaces that could one day guide surgeons' hands. 3 years had passed since that fateful dinner, but the echo of her own voice, "Tanaka-sama, please forgive this disrespect, I can help," still resonated, a spark that had ignited a new life. Zola was no longer just a waitress. She was a force carving her own path with every determined step. In the aftermath of that night, the world had shifted. The leaked recording of James Whitaker and Ethan Cole's deceit had rippled through Seattle's tech circles like a stone in still water. Synergy Med's stock plummeted, and James, once a titan, was summoned to a closed-door boardroom meeting that ended with his resignation. His name vanished from industry panels, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. Ethan followed, his resignation letter citing personal reasons. But the truth was written in the headlines. Tech giants exposed in billion-dollar deception. The press feasted on the story, a Japanese billionaire outwitting her would-be predators with the aid of a courageous black waitress. Zola's name became a beacon, Her courage a spark that lit up comment sections and inspired whispered conversations in boardrooms and cafes alike. Zola's new role at Neurotech Nippon had been a lifeline, but it was her own grit that turned it into a ladder. Aiko Tanaka, the billionaire whose silence had been her strength, had seen something in Zola that night, a fire, a shared resilience. As a cultural and strategic advisor, Zola threw herself into the work, bridging Japanese precision with American innovation. She spent long days navigating international partnerships, her fluency in Japanese weaving trust, where contracts alone fell short. But her nights were her own, filled with sketches and prototypes, her passion for design reigniting under the mentorship of industry leaders Aiko had connected her with. Each line she drew, each interface she crafted, was a step toward reclaiming the dreams she'd once buried under the weight of survival. The work wasn't easy. Zola faced skepticism, colleagues who raised eyebrows at her unorthodox entry, whispers that she was just the waitress who got lucky. But she'd learned to wear her past like armor, not a wound. She studied late into the night, mastering project management and user interface design, her apartment a mosaic of coffee mugs and open laptops. By the second year, she was leading Neurotech's diversity initiatives, ensuring voices like hers, black, bold, overlooked, found a seat at the table. Her confidence grew, not from praise but from the quiet victories. A prototype approved, a partnership sealed, a nod from Aiko during a board meeting. By the third year, Zola launched her own studio, Horizon Designs, specializing in intuitive interfaces for medical technology. Her first client? Neurotech Nippon, now a partner, not an employer. Aiko, too, had emerged stronger. Her silence that night had been a masterstroke, a deliberate choice to let her enemies underestimate her until the moment was right. Neurotech Nippon's U.S. expansion soared, its neural AI transforming hospitals from Seattle to Shanghai. Aiko became a symbol, not just of wealth, but of resilience, her story a testament to the power of those who choose their battles with care. She and Zola remained connected, their bond forged in that crucible of a dinner. During rare visits to Seattle, Aiko would meet Zola over tea, their conversations a blend of Japanese and English, laughter and strategy. "You saw me," Aiko had said that night, and those words became their unspoken vow. To see, to lift, to empower. Zola stood on her balcony, her sketchbook open to a new design, a neural interface with a sleek, inclusive layout. The city below buzzed with life, its rhythm a reminder of the world she was shaping. She thought of the Aurora Room, of the moment she'd chosen courage over silence. That night had been a pivot, a door blown open by her own voice. She wasn't just a designer or an advisor now. She was a woman who'd rewritten her story, who'd turned invisibility into power. Her studio, though small, was a beacon for others, a place where young designers of color found mentorship, where ideas flourished without fear of dismissal. The sun broke through the mist, casting golden threads across the sound. Zola closed her sketchbook, her heart full. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning, a world where the overlooked could rise, where silence could speak louder than words. Aiko had taught her that strength wasn't always loud, and Zola had learned that courage could change everything. Their story wasn't just about a failed deal or a moment of defiance. It was about seeing the unseen, about voices that refused to be silenced. And as Zola stepped back inside, ready to face another day of creation, she knew the world was listening, finally. This story of Zola Hayes and Aiko Tanaka is more than a tale of courage. It's a reminder that the quietest voices can spark the loudest change. Their defiance in the face of deceit shows us that strength lies in seeing the unseen, in standing up when the world expects silence. We hope this journey inspires you to recognize the power in your own voice, no matter how small it feels. Share your thoughts below. Tell us what this story means to you or who it reminds you of. Your perspective matters. Thank you for joining us in this moment of triumph and transformation. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge, uplift, and redefine what's possible. Until next time, keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in the power of the overlooked. We'll see you soon.